Ever scrolled through social media and wondered, is anything I'm reading actually true? Welcome to the world of epistemic security, the battle for reliable information in an age of misinformation. Here's the deal. Misinformation spreads faster than free pizza at a tech conference. And echo chambers. They're like online cults, but with fewer robes and more hashtags. This isn't just about abstract theories. It impacts everything from health choices to political decisions, strained relationships, and even economic stability. Even celebrities aren't safe. They have been caught in the crossfire of false narratives. So, what can we do about it? In this episode, we'll break down what epistemic security really means, why it matters right now, and how you can outsmart the misinformation machine. Stick around. Let's unpack this mess together.
Welcome to today's deep dive, where we'll be looking at something pretty crucial for democracies to work well: epistemic security.
Ooh, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's all about how we can build up like a resistance to misinformation and manipulation, in the world of information.
So it's like building an immune system, but for all the information that's out there.
Exactly. To help us get a grip on this, we're going to be diving into a report from DEMOS.
Demos.
Yeah, they're a think tank based in the UK, and they focus on making democracy better, in our digital age. And they've done some pretty cool research into the threats facing our information systems and what we can do about them.
I'm all ears. This is right up my alley.
One of the things that really jumps out from their report is this idea that the UK is facing a growing threat to its information supply chain.
Oh, wow. That's a bit worrying, isn't it? Like if the pipeline bringing us news and facts and all the stuff we need to make good decisions is getting messed up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just a UK thing either.
You're right. This feels way bigger. I mean, with how fast technology spreads information these days, it's a global issue for sure.
Totally. The implications are huge. One thing that Demos points out is the decline of local news.
Oh, yeah. I've noticed that it's like a vacuum that's being filled by all sorts of speculation and unreliable stuff, especially on social media.
Which makes me think about all those heated debates you see online where people just go at it with opinions and, real reporting kind of gets lost.
It's a breeding ground for distrust, for sure, even those wild conspiracy theories.
Right. The report also digs into how our brains work, like our own cognitive biases.
Oh, that's fascinating. Like how we're wired to be more vulnerable to manipulation.
Yeah, things like our limited attention span or that tendency to look for things that confirm what we already believe, even if it's not true.
Confirmation bias. Yeah, we've all been there.
And then you add in social media with those addictive algorithms, and it's like it's designed to keep us hooked even when the information is not accurate.
It's true. It's like a constant cycle of scrolling and engaging, even when we're getting fed misleading stuff. It makes you realize how crucial it is to build more resilient systems for sharing and evaluating information.
Absolutely. Demos suggest some interesting solutions in their report, like throwing more support behind independent journalism.
Yeah, they've been hit hard trying to adapt to the digital world, haven't they?
And another big one is putting in stronger regulations for those social media giants so they're more accountable for what spreads on their platforms.
Definitely. They have so much power.
And we can't forget about education.
Oh, yeah. Super important. We need to give people the tools to spot misinformation so they're not just taking everything at face value.
Like critical thinking skills for the internet age.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a fascinating section in the report where they talk about epistemic communities, like groups of people who share similar ways of knowing and evaluating information.
I was just thinking about that. Like the groups I trust for information. It could be journalists, academics, or even specific forums online. It's about recognizing that not all sources are created equal.
It's so true. In a world where it's easy to feel lost in a sea of information, these communities are like anchors. They help us make sense of things, building that trust and finding some sort of consensus.
Exactly. So it's not just about dodging the bad information, but also about actively looking for the good stuff, the reliable sources, and connecting with those communities that value, evidence and reason.
Spot on. But it gets even more interesting because the report also looks at how policymakers are dealing with all of this.
Oh, right, because they're the ones who need to come up with solutions.
Exactly. And they found something called the Whitehall bubble.
The Whitehall bubble, what's that?
It refers to this disconnect between people making policy decisions and, what's actually happening in people's lives.
So they're kind of out of touch.
In a way, yeah. The report found that only 12% of senior civil servants are based outside of London.
Oh, wow. So it's no wonder some policies seem a bit off, right?
Yeah, and it highlights something crucial for epistemic security, like really understanding the lived experiences of those who are affected by the policies we make.
Makes sense. What else did they find about how policymakers are dealing with all of this?
Well, they talked about how all the political turbulence and the focus on short-term thinking can get in the way of making those long-term policies that we really need.
Like they're always putting out fires instead of addressing the root cause.
Yeah, it's like there's this pressure to deliver quick fixes instead of tackling the deeper issues. They even quoted a former senior civil servant who said that ministers are under so much pressure to get things right quickly.
Because if they mess up, it's all over the news, right?
Exactly. It's a tough spot to be in. And then on the other side of things, they found that some politicians are actually hesitant to involve the public in policymaking.
Really? Why is that?
They're worried about losing control or looking indecisive, which is understandable in a way.
I guess so. But isn't involving the public a good thing?
It can be, but the report quotes a former minister who was concerned that involving the public would make politicians look like they weren't doing their jobs.
So it's a delicate balance, isn't it? Like, how do you involve the public without seeming like you're shirking your responsibility?
Exactly. Finding that sweet spot is key. It's not about just doing whatever the public wants. It's more about creating a process that's informed and collaborative so we can actually come up with better solutions.
I like that. So are there examples of where public participation has actually worked well?
Absolutely. The DEMOS report highlights Melbourne's People's Panel. It was this citizen-led initiative where a random group of residents gave input on the city's 10-year financial plan.
And did it work?
It did. The council actually adopted most of the panel's recommendations.
Wow, that's impressive. It shows that involving the public can lead to real change.
It really does. But then they contrast this with examples where government programs failed, partly because they didn't really consider the people they were supposed to be helping.
Oh no, like what?
One example was the UK government's Green Deal program, which was supposed to help with energy efficiency.
What happened with that?
It struggled because they didn't really think about the challenges faced by smaller building firms or how complicated the application process was for homeowners.
So no one really used it.
Exactly. It had really low take-up, and they ended up scrapping it. A missed opportunity for sure. It just goes to show that getting input from different stakeholders early on is crucial.
Right. Like if they had talked to builders and the public before, they might have been able to avoid those problems.
Totally. So it's a reminder that building epistemic security isn't just about protecting ourselves from bad information.
It's also about actively seeking out different viewpoints.
Yeah.
And using that to make better decisions.
Exactly. And that brings us to another question. How do we even get people to have these constructive conversations when it feels like everyone's so divided these days?
It feels like finding common ground is getting harder and harder.
It's true. But the DEMOS report suggests that things like citizen assemblies and juries can actually help with this, even on really controversial issues.
Wait, how does that work?
Yeah.
How do you bring people together who completely disagree?
Well, there's research showing that when you give people the time and space to talk things out respectfully and you provide them with accurate information, they actually start to understand each other better.
So you're saying they don't have to agree, but at least they can start to see where the other side is coming from.
Right. They might even find some common ground. The key is to create a safe environment where everyone feels heard and respected.
That makes sense. Do they have an example of that working?
Yeah, they mentioned this really interesting exercise on immigration policy in the UK after Brexit.
Oh, wow. That's a hot button issue for sure.
Right. But they found that after participating in this deliberative exercise, people were more open to considering different viewpoints.
That's encouraging.
Yeah, it just goes to show that even on the toughest issues, there's hope for meaningful dialogue. The DEMOS report also talks about these citizens' conversations they held.
What were those like?
They brought together a diverse group of people to chat about all sorts of policy areas, things like affordable housing, assisted dying, and even defense spending.
So a pretty wide range of topics.
And what was really cool was that people were actually eager to participate. They felt like it was important to have a say in the policies that would affect their lives.
That's a great sign, right?
Totally. It shows that people want to be involved, and when they feel like their voices are being heard, it helps to bridge that gap between them and the policymakers.
So it's a win-win situation.
Exactly. So we've talked about all these ideas and research findings.
But how do we actually put them into action? How do we build a society that's more epistemically secure?
Good question.
Right.
And luckily, the DEMOSs report has some concrete recommendations for making that happen, at least in the UK.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's dive into those recommendations.
Yeah.
They've got a whole plan for embedding public participation into how the government works. It's ambitious, but they make a strong case for why it's necessary.
It sounds like they're trying to shift the balance of power, giving citizens a more direct role in shaping the policies that affect them.
That's exactly it. So one of the big things they suggest is setting up these flagship citizens panels.
Citizens panels.
Yeah, to give input to these new mission boards the government's created.
What are mission boards?
They're basically groups focused on tackling these big national challenges.
Like what kind of challenges?
Things like climate change, economic inequality, healthcare, that sort of thing.
Oh, I see. So these citizens panels, they'd be made up of regular people, not just politicians and experts.
Exactly. The idea is to have a random selection that's like a snapshot of the UK's population, all different backgrounds and stuff.
Well, that's pretty cool. So they'd be the ones helping to figure out what's important, what trade-offs need to be made, and ultimately shaping these policies.
That's the goal, to give people a real stake in shaping the future of the country.
That sounds like a lot of responsibility. I mean, how do you make sure these panels actually represent everyone and that their voices are heard?
Don't worry, the report goes into detail about how to recruit people, facilitate the discussions, and make sure they have all the support they need.
So it's not just throwing them in the deep end?
No, it's all very structured and well thought out. There's an emphasis on clear communication, accurate information, and a process that lets them really deliberate and have their say.
That makes sense. It sounds like they've put a lot of thought into it.
They have. They even suggest announcing these panels right away in the first 100 days of a new government.
Oh, wow. So it's like a priority from the get-go.
Exactly. It shows they're serious about this citizen engagement thing. It's not just a one-off thing.
I like that. It makes a statement. And they also talk about this citizens pool.
Oh, yeah, that's a neat idea.
What is that?
So instead of starting from scratch every time they need a panel, they want to create this big pool of citizens, at least 2,500 people who are ready to go.
So it's like a ready-made resource for getting people involved.
Exactly. It saves time and resources, and it makes sure there's always that diverse range of voices at the table.
That's clever. I hadn't thought about it like that.
And to support all of this, they also recommend setting up a central hub within the government, like a dedicated team.
What would they do?
Basically, they'd be there to provide training and support to different departments, to make sure everyone's on the same page when it comes to citizen engagement.
Like creating a culture of participation.
Exactly. Making it a normal part of how the government works, not just an afterthought.
I like it. So it's not just lip service. They're really baking it into the system.
Right. And to make sure everyone's actually taking it seriously, they propose this new citizen participation assessment.
What's that?
Basically, when departments are making policies, they have to show how they've involved the public.
So they can't just tick a box and say, yeah, we did it.
Nope. They have to demonstrate what they did, how they engaged people, and what impact it had.
So it's about accountability, right? Making sure they're actually taking citizen input on board.
Exactly. And to make it even more serious, they recommend integrating this assessment into the pre-legislative process.
Whoa, so before a bill even gets to Parliament, they have to show they've involved the public.
That's the idea. It's pretty bold, but it really shows they're committed to this whole epistemic security thing.
Makes sense. If you want policies that work, they have to reflect the needs of the people they affect.
Right. But it does raise a question, though, doesn't it? Who gets to decide what counts as enough public involvement?
Yeah, that's a good point. It seems pretty subjective.
That's why they also recommend creating this independent body to set standards, to make sure everything's fair and transparent.
So like a watchdog for citizen engagement.
Exactly. They suggest it could start as part of an existing organization like the Electoral Commission.
Oh, the ones that oversee elections?
Yeah. They already have a role in making sure things are democratic and above board, so it kind of makes sense to build on that.
It's definitely more efficient than creating a whole new organization from scratch.
And of course, all of this has to be tracked, you know? They really emphasize evaluating the impact of all this citizen engagement, making sure the government actually considers those recommendations from the citizens' assemblies.
So it's not just going through the motions.
No, it's about showing people that their input matters, that someone's actually listening.
Which builds trust in the process, right?
Exactly. They even suggest that Parliament could set up its own panels made up of people from these assemblies to keep an eye on the government.
Whoa, so citizens will be holding the government accountable.
Yeah, wouldn't that be cool? It's like a direct line from the people to the heart of government.
It's a fascinating idea. And it all comes back to that core idea of epistemic security, doesn't it? Like, if we want a society that can resist all this misinformation and manipulation, we need to create systems that value different viewpoints.
Right. Systems that encourage critical thinking and give people a genuine voice.
And the DEMOS report offers some pretty concrete steps for how we can achieve that, at least in the UK.
But it's definitely relevant for other democracies too. You know, it's like a blueprint for building a more resilient society in the digital age.
One thing that really stood out to me was their focus on trust. They did this survey asking people about how much they trusted politicians.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. The results weren't great, were they?
No, most people didn't really trust politicians to make decisions in the best interests of the country, or to be honest about the challenges they face.
It's a bit depressing, isn't it?
It is. But then they asked if people's trust would increase if the government actually involved them in policymaking.
Ah.
Trust went way up. It's amazing how much of a difference it makes when people feel like they're being heard.
It just shows that involving the public isn't just about making people feel good. It actually makes for better policy.
And it strengthens democracy, right?
Exactly. It's a win-win situation. But the DEMOS report goes even further. They delve into the challenges facing the UK's media landscape. You know, how can we ensure strong and diverse media that support a healthy democracy?
Right, because information is power.
Exactly. They argue that media policy is key here. They call for some urgent action, particularly when it comes to supporting high-quality news and information.
So what are they suggesting?
Well, one big idea is to strengthen public service broadcasting, like the BBC.
What do they want to do with the BBC?
They think it should have a bigger role in supporting news and information, especially at the local level.
So helping those smaller outlets that are struggling.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that public service media is vital, especially now with all the distrust in traditional media and the rise of misinformation online.
So how would they do that?
They suggest a bunch of things, like giving more funding and resources to local news, developing new digital platforms, and promoting media literacy so people can be more savvy about what they're consuming.
It's like a whole ecosystem approach, right?
Yep.
Making sure we have a strong foundation for informed citizens.
That's it. And they're not just talking about public service broadcasting. They also want to create a new contestable fund for what they call public interest journalism.
Public interest journalism.
It's basically high-quality investigative journalism, the kind that really matters, even if it's not always profitable.
So stuff that people need to know, but that might not sell as well.
Yeah. This fund would help make sure that kind of journalism can survive, you know, keep those investigations going.
That's so important. And what about this idea of updating the rules around media mergers?
Oh, yeah, that's huge. Right now, there are a handful of companies that have way too much influence over the information we get.
It's a bit scary when you think about it.
It is. So they want to make sure there's a diverse media landscape with lots of different voices and viewpoints.
So what are they proposing?
They want to make it harder for companies to merge if it means less competition, especially when it comes to online platforms.
Because everything's so interconnected these days, right? Yeah.
Yep.
You can't just look at traditional media anymore.
Exactly. And they're also concerned about this power imbalance between news publishers and those big tech companies like Google and Facebook.
Yeah, I've heard about that. They use content from news organizations but don't really pay for it.
That's the problem. It's putting a lot of strain on news publishers, especially local ones.
So what's the solution?
DEMOs suggests exploring things like a link tax so that news organizations get a fair share of the money being made from their content.
I can see why they'd want that. It's only fair.
Right. But it's a tricky issue. There's no easy answer. But they also have this other idea, something about must-carry rules for social media.
Must carry rules. What are those?
So right now, those big platforms like Facebook and Twitter, they control what you see, and their algorithms often favor things that are more engaging, even if they're not accurate or in the public interest.
So like clickbait and stuff.
Exactly. But must-carry rules, they're a thing in TV broadcasting, where broadcasters have to carry certain public service channels.
Oh, I see. So they want to apply that to social media.
That's the idea. Make those platforms prioritize certain types of content, like high-quality news from trusted sources.
So people don't just get stuck in those filter bubbles.
Right. But of course, figuring out what counts as public interest news is not straightforward.
I can imagine. It's a big debate.
So they recommend setting up an independent commission to figure that out, one that's led by citizens.
Oh, that's smart. It takes it out of the hands of politicians and tech companies and lets the people decide.
Exactly. So it's all about ensuring that people have access to the information they need, not just what's going to keep them scrolling endlessly.
I like that. It's about quality over quantity.
Exactly. But regulating platforms is only one part of the puzzle. We also need to make sure that the information itself is beneficial to society.
That's where epistemic security comes in.
Right. And the DEMOSs report has a bunch of recommendations for tackling online manipulation and disinformation.
So things like those deep fakes and fake news articles we hear about.
Yeah, they're a huge problem. And they point out that the UK's current online safety laws don't really go far enough.
So they need to be tougher.
They think so. One idea is to be more explicit about protecting epistemic security in those laws.
What does that mean exactly?
Well, for example, they want to make it clear that harmful content includes stuff that's designed to mislead or manipulate people, especially during elections.
So it's not just about content that's illegal, but content that's intentionally deceptive, even if it's not technically breaking the law.
Right. It's about protecting the integrity of the information ecosystem, making sure people can trust what they're seeing.
That's a big shift.
It is. And they also want to give regulators more power to investigate and deal with those coordinated disinformation campaigns.
Oh yeah, those are scary. Like when a bunch of fake accounts work together to spread something?
Exactly. Right now, the laws are more focused on individual pieces of content, but disinformation often works through networks and strategies, so they need a way to tackle that.
It's like taking a more holistic approach.
Yeah.
Looking at the bigger picture.
Right. They also suggest setting up a rapid response unit, like a SWAT team for disinformation.
A SWAT team for disinformation. That sounds intense.
It would be. They'd be experts in data science, social media, all that stuff, and they'd be able to spot those disinformation campaigns as they're happening and jump into action.
So like an early warning system.
Exactly. They could also work on educating the public about disinformation tactics and how to spot them.
So it's like building up those antibodies, making the system more resilient.
That's the idea. And they also want to look at new ways to hold those platforms accountable.
Because right now it feels like they can get away with a lot.
It's true. They often claim they're just neutral platforms, but they have so much influence.
It's like they're the new gatekeepers of information.
Right. So DEMOs suggests things like requiring platforms to do regular risk assessments, being more transparent about their algorithms, and making it easier for users to report problems.
So basically putting more pressure on them to clean up their act.
Yeah. And they also have some ideas for reforming political advertising online.
Oh yeah, that's another Wild West out there.
It is. Right now, there are way fewer rules for online political ads than traditional ones.
Which opens the door for all sorts of abuse.
Exactly. So they suggest applying the same rules that exist for broadcast ads, limiting how much parties can spend, and banning ads from those shadowy groups that pop up during elections.
It's all about making things fairer and more transparent, right? Protecting the integrity of elections.
Absolutely. And they also talk about foreign interference, those attempts to influence our democratic processes.
Like Russia meddling in elections, that kind of thing.
Yeah. It can be anything from disinformation campaigns to cyber attacks or even trying to funnel money to influence things.
That's scary. It feels like we're always hearing about these threats.
It's a real concern. So they recommend a bunch of measures, like creating clear laws to define and prosecute foreign interference, beefing up cybersecurity around elections, and making political donations more transparent.
So they're not messing around.
They're not. They even suggest this circuit breaker mechanism that could delay an election if there's a major cyber attack or something that could mess with the vote.
Whoa, that's pretty drastic.
It is. It would need careful oversight, of course, but it shows they're taking these threats seriously.
Yeah, you can't just assume everything will be fine. You have to be prepared for the worst.
Exactly. They also want those intelligence agencies to be more open about what they're doing to protect elections.
So like telling the public what they're up to, but not giving away too much.
Right. It's a balancing act for sure. And they also stress the importance of getting civil society involved, giving people ways to report suspicious activity and participate in monitoring efforts.
So it's not just leaving it to the government.
Nope. It's a whole-of-society effort, empowering citizens to protect their own democracy.
It's inspiring in a way, isn't it? Like we all have a role to play.
We do. And it all comes back to epistemic security. It's not just about being smart about the information we consume. It's about building a system that's strong and resilient, a system where everyone can participate and feel confident that the information they're getting is reliable.
So it's about more than just facts. It's about trust and transparency and accountability.
Exactly. And the Demos report lays out a roadmap for how we can get there.
It's a lot to think about. But it's also hopeful in a way, isn't it? Like there are solutions, we just need to put in the work.
I agree. It's not going to be easy, but it's worth fighting for.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, all these threats to our information systems, and some pretty big ideas for fixing them. But I gotta admit, it's a little overwhelming. Like what can I as an individual actually do about this stuff?
Yeah, I get it. It's easy to feel kind of powerless when you're talking about these huge problems, but the Demos report actually gives some pretty practical tips for how we can all become, more savvy about information.
Okay, I'm all ears. Like what kind of stuff?
Well, it starts with recognizing that we all have biases, right? Things that can warp how we see information.
We talked about confirmation bias earlier, that thing where we look for stuff that confirms what we already believe.
Exactly. And there are others too, like the availability heuristic.
Well, what now?
It's basically where we tend to overestimate the likelihood of something happening based on how easily we can recall it.
Oh, so like if there's a plane crash that's all over the news.
Exactly. People might suddenly think flying is super dangerous, even though statistically it's still one of the safest ways to travel.
So it's like our brains are playing tricks on us.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Our emotions can really cloud our judgment. So how do we fight back against these biases?
Yeah, how do we outsmart our own brains?
Well, one thing that helps is actively seeking out different perspectives.
Yeah.
Don't just stick to the same sources of information.
So like reading news from different outlets, following people on social media who have different views.
Exactly. And even having conversations with people you disagree with.
Yeah. Oh, that's a tough one. I'm not sure I'm ready for that.
It can be challenging, for sure, but it's so important. It's not about agreeing with them. It's about understanding where they're coming from.
Okay, that makes sense. But it's not just about who we're getting information from.
Yeah.
It's also about how we evaluate the information itself.
Absolutely. Just because something looks official or everyone's sharing it doesn't make it true.
So much stuff is designed to look credible, even if it's not. Are there any red flags we can look out for?
Definitely. Check the website or the social media account of whoever's sharing it. Look for signs of bias, like really strong emotional language.
So like lots of exclamation points and I'll see Cappy.
Yeah, exactly. Or if they're making claims without any evidence to back them up. And be wary of things that are designed to make you feel really strongly, like fear or anger.
Because then you just want to share it without thinking.
That's right. It's a tactic, to bypass your critical thinking. Another thing that's super helpful is cross-checking information.
So like if a story seems really surprising or controversial.
See if any other reputable news organizations are reporting the same thing. If not, it might be a sign that something's fishy.
So basically, do your homework.
Yeah. Don't just take things at face value, and don't be afraid to do your own research too, If you're not sure about a source or a claim, dig a little deeper.
So like using fact-checking websites or looking at academic journals.
Exactly. We have so many tools at our fingertips now. It's like becoming an information detective.
I like that. Putting on my Sherlock Holmes hat.
Exactly. It's about being curious and skeptical and ultimately taking responsibility for the information we choose to believe.
Makes sense. And it makes me think about those epistemic communities we talked about earlier, those groups that share similar ways of knowing and evaluating stuff.
Oh, yeah, they're crucial. They can help us make sense of all this noise, give us a framework for figuring out what's reliable.
So what are some examples of these communities?
It could be professional groups like scientists or academics who have to follow certain standards for their work, or even online communities that have a strong culture of fact-checking and source verification.
So it's about being part of something bigger than yourself, a community that values truth and evidence.
And we can all play a role in building those communities up, by supporting fact-checking organizations, by having respectful debates online, by promoting critical thinking with our friends and family.
So it's not just about protecting ourselves from bad information. It's about creating a better information environment for everyone.
That's it. It's a collective effort.
I like that. So basically, we need to be more aware of our biases, more careful about our sources, and more proactive in building communities that value truth.
And don't be afraid to question things, If something seems off, it probably is. Trust your gut.
Great advice. Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. It's given me a lot to think about.
Me too. It's a complex issue, but it's also really hopeful in a way, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
Like, we're not powerless. There are things we can do.
exactly. We have the tools and knowledge. Now it's just about putting them into practice.
So let's all go out there and be those information detectives, build those resilient communities, and work together to create a world where we can trust the information we're getting.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for having me on this deep dive. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you all next time.